let's get started. Um, anyway, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining. I'm Nishant Mani. I'm a partner at Climate Capital. I'll keep the intro super quick because honestly, we have so much to cover. We are here to talk about something that just a few years ago, honestly, felt like a side bet in climate tech. So I myself have been in the world of climate only for about 5 years now. And I remember when I first came in, I was like, oh, this whole nuclear thing makes a lot of sense, right? But turns out that it was just like, yeah, the one nuclear pun I'm going to make, it was orbiting around the core of climate tech. After this, no more puns. But it is now legitimately a key sector, and honestly, still probably one of the more opaque corners of the energy world. This whole idea of venture scale nuclear. So I'm excited to dig into it. Over the past 5 years, we've watched a wave of private capital flood into advanced fusion and fission. Some of the biggest rounds in the climate tech history. Commonwealth Fusion raised 1.8 billion recently in a Series B, I think. Helion just signed a first ever fusion PPA with Microsoft, which is pretty wild if you think about it. And TAE brought in Chevron and Google as investors. So we're starting to kind of bring in large CVCs as well. So, it's not really fringe anymore. It's a real sector. And even outside of private capital, Sam Altman took Oklo public via SPAC. Well, I shouldn't say he did, but he kind of helped shepherd it. And it's not yet, at least, a dud like other SPACs. It's actually doing really well. So, it's being driven by two forces coming to a head, right? First is there's always been the climate imperative. We need all sources of zero carbon power on a massive scale. And, nuclear just wasn't in the conversation for a while, but it clearly is in the conversation now. And I think, there's a timely energy crunch coming because of AI data centers. They're eating gigawatts, and every hyperscaler is looking for stable local baseload power. And for the first time in decades, nuclear just isn't just a climate story. It's a compute infrastructure story. And then we have all of the executive orders that Trump issues, like one a day. So there's one about 300 gigawatts of new nuclear by 2050. There's a whole bunch around the deregulation of the NRC, which is the Nuclear Regulatory Committee. And a bunch of others. So this is a sector that's moving fast and it's moving with a lot of crosswinds. But there's always a but, right? This is a space where timelines are long, the tech risk is high, and CapEx is pretty astounding.
This is great. If it's okay, I'm just going to jump out right here. Yeah, perfect.
Oh, thanks. And yet early stage venture is very much in the mix. So today we're going to unpack what's real, what's hype, what to look for in an early stage nuclear pitch, what founders need to get right to really scale their companies in the space, and where this is all headed in the next few years. So to help us do that, I'm thrilled to have Mike Mettler with us. Mike is a veteran angel investor with deep nuclear energy and climate experience. And he now runs Roadrunner VC, which, by the way, has the best URL ever. It literally is beepbeepvc.co.com. I don't remember the dot, but if you search
beepbeep.vc.
Oh, beepbeep.vc, you'll find it. And Mike is a core part of our brain trust at Climate Capital as we continue our multi-shot strategy at early stage climate investment. So excited to have Mike here. But before we jump in, two quick plugs. The first is we have a brand new take on Climate Angels starting July 10. So Climate Angels is a program that we started with the goal of getting more capital into the early stage climate ecosystem. I actually recognize a couple of alum over here. Thank you for joining us again. So the program gives aspiring and current angel investors a broad overview of the climate tech ecosystem, deep dives into various sectors, tools to help them source, diligence, and support climate startups. And it also kickstarts the co-investor network for them. And the program used to be a 6-week intensive, but given a bunch of feedback and an acknowledgement of the reality of how investing really works, we've now turned it into an annual membership with 3 monthly sessions each month, all year round. so that we can really up the practical reps that folks can get in climate angel investing. So July 10th is the kickoff of this new version, and I really encourage folks to apply. The chat has the link. So yeah, feel free to check it out. And the other quick update is the Climate Capital Network Fund is taking in checks for its Q3 fund. So this is the rolling fund that we've been running since 2019 that makes 50 to 70 investments a year, alongside top tier VCs in early stage climate tech across all sectors. And we are in the top 2% of AngelList fund managers when comparing markups over baseline. A huge part of what makes this whole thing work is that we have a massive network now that's built across the 400 plus portfolio companies that we have, and the 100 plus top tier VCs that we've co-invested with, and of course the thousands of LPs in our syndicate. So if you're looking to gain exposure to a broad swath of climate tech, check that link out in the chat as well. With the plugs behind us, let's get into it. Mike, would love for you to introduce yourself.
Great. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining. Can everybody hear me? I assume that's a yes. Okay, great. Thank you all for your time. I'll tell you briefly about me, and then also during the talk, please interrupt and shout questions at any time. That would be delightful. So let's see. So first of all, I should say I am not a physicist. I have also never worked in a fusion reactor or built a fission or fusion startup. I did my undergrad in chemistry and computer science. I did work at the Stanford Linear Accelerator for a while doing collision modeling. And then I worked at Bloom Energy building fuel cells. And then most of my career was actually doing 2 machine learning startups, doing much less exciting things than fusion and fission. One company did well, one didn't. And then after that, I started doing a bunch of angel investing, got really into fusion and fission. And then my day job now, as Nishant mentioned, is at a fund called Roadrunner. So we spin technology out of national labs and research universities, primarily Los Alamos and Sandia. So I've spent a bunch of time on both the fusion and fission side professionally there as well.
That's great. So let's get into it, Mike. So opening context, why nuclear and why now? So let's start with the fact that you've backed a range of climate startups. What made nuclear cross the venture backable threshold for you personally as an early stage investor when you first started investing in nuclear?
Yeah, so I mean, I think like anything else, there's a big yes and happening here, which is, our poor planet needs all the help it can get. One of the many things it needs is better generation. So we can burn fossil fuels to generate energy. We can also collect the energy that, falls from the sun and the sky. We also need more clean, firm baseload. And there's a couple options for that. One of them is geothermal and one is nuclear, and nuclear sort of breaks out into both fusion and fission, which I can talk about a little bit more, but they're very different, but both important.
I'm curious to dig into kind of what's going on right now, right? So we saw a wave of funding in 2021 through 2023. Part of it went to nuclear startups, but we're seeing kind of this new wave come now in this AI cross-Trump era, as I call it. What makes today different from your perspective? What's kind of makes it a why now?
Yeah. So a couple thoughts, right? So if you look at US electricity consumption over time, it had been declining for various good reasons having to do with economy and efficiency. In the last couple of years, that's actually turned around, and you actually start to see generation demand increasing. And that doesn't just have to do with AI, it has to do with a bunch of other things. But I think the why now is because if you look at an energy intensive future, there's a lot of things that we can do when we are able to produce a lot more clean electricity. We can make higher value materials, we can transition off gas. There's many, many reasons why nuclear is a great fit for all of that. And maybe now is a good time to talk about fusion and fission and a little bit about how they're different, and why both fusion and fission are important. So we can get our electrons from all sorts of places. there are great ways of getting that electricity out from fission, which really is a collection of very large molecules that are sort of like wound up springs. So you have molecules that when you whack them in the right way, they release a whole bunch of energy as heat and as other particles. And they're really sort of coiled up, high potential sources of energy that is just waiting to get released. And so the context at a high level for fission is you really have a technology which is relatively low risk on the engineering standpoint, but high risk on the regulatory standpoint. So fission, we've been doing it for 50 years. We built reactors in the 70s. They work great. The problem is in the US, we stopped building them. And so we got out of the habit on the manufacturing side, and we overregulated all of those reactors, so they're harder and more expensive to build. Fusion is almost exactly the inverse. So fusion is, instead of having these like, high potential wound up molecules, you try really hard to smush together really tiny molecules, isotopes of hydrogen. And when they stick together, it releases a whole bunch of energy. So it's almost exactly the opposite problem. So back in the 50s and 60s at Los Alamos, when fusion was first getting developed for weapons use, they thought energy generation fusion was going to be really easy. It was going to be just as easy as fission, where you basically kick the fancy molecules and they release all the energy. We thought it was going to be really easy to squish these tiny molecules together, these tiny elements together. So it turns out that's actually not the case. And when you squish these isotopes of hydrogen together, you need to squish them in a really uniform way. But it's sort of like squishing a balloon, where little bits of the balloon kind of pop out on the sides. To get a perfectly round squishing is really, really hard. And so all of the fusion effort has been incredibly high science risk, where you have a large multidimensional search space of experimentation that you're trying to walk through and figure out how you're going to squish the balloon together in a really uniform way. But if you can squish the balloon, then regulatorily speaking, it's easy. Fusion is relatively unregulated compared to fission. It does not produce any proliferation concerns. It does not produce waste. So this is why, the hand wavy dreams of fusion are really that it is this holy grail of nuclear energy, or the holy grail of energy generation, where it does not have any bad externalities. It's only good stuff. But boy, is the science challenging. So fusion and fission are really two sides of the same coin. Neither of them is going to get built out, at scale in the US anytime soon. Fission will probably happen first, but both are really important to that sort of larger energy transition, and that demand increase, which is starting to kick in now.
Thank you so much for that. Look, while we're on this topic, I'd love to get into kind of what early stage means. And I'm sure they mean something very, very different for fission versus fusion. So when you are looking at early stage companies in the space, what kind of milestones are you looking for that you can underwrite?
Yeah. So they're very different. So let's take fission first of all. So all of the reactor designs that folks are starting companies around have all been dreamed up, 50 years ago or more. The trick is building them. So with fission, the typical company profile is, dusting off an old RAND research report or an old lab assessment of a particular reactor design, pulling it into the modern era with either new materials, or a new manufacturing approach, and being able to take that well-known science and build it cheaply and at scale. So you typically folks typically talk about, scalable manufacturing approaches to building nuclear. This is sort of one reason why SMRs are so popular, because you can build lots of them cheaply. But the core risk there isn't science. So it's how do you buy down the manufacturing and execution risk. And with fusion, it's almost exactly the opposite, where you're commercializing some raw science that is coming out of a lab or a research organization, and the science has been done. And coupled with that, you have maybe materials tailwind. So this is very popular on the magnetic confinement side, where you have fancy high temperature semiconducting magnets that make it easier to squish the plasma together to reach fusion conditions, or you have fancy lasers that's easier to bombard a little fuel pellet with X-rays, but you're taking a raw science invention and commercializing that science on the path to actual demonstration of a fusion product. So fission has regulatory risk and manufacturing risk. Fusion has a bunch of science risk. And so you want a startup company to either have a deep insight into one of those buckets of risk to build a company around it.
And I'd love to kind of push a little bit more on this because, again, most of the folks here are going to be very early stage in terms of their investing focus. You know, on the science risk side with fusion, can you give an example milestone or two that you typically look at or think about when you know, in terms of kind of either what the company has achieved or what they're going to achieve with this round, and
Yes.
similarly on fission in terms of manufacturing
Yes.
milestones that we're talking about?
So with fusion, just to step back for a second, so there's sort of two families of fusion science that the DOE funded 20 years ago. One uses magnets and one uses lasers. So the magnet folks, it's called magnetic confinement. Typically, people build these as tokamaks or stellarators, where you basically have magnets that you're using to squish and contain this plasma to get it to burn. The laser approach is the most demonstrated, I would say, in terms of experimental proof, where you have the National Ignition Facility out here at Livermore that takes a tiny pellet of fuel, deuterium and tritium, zaps it with a whole bunch of X-rays generated by fancy lasers to burn that fuel. Both of these approaches have pros and cons. Typically, the things you want to look for are published research in the space that has fully simulated an approach. So you kind of figure it out first in bits before you build all the atoms, because the atoms are slow and expensive. And so if you're looking at a new fusion scheme and it's not just lasers or donuts, you want to look for peer-reviewed research that has fully simulated the physics of whatever fusion scheme is being worked on. And there's lots of other things, sort of other hybrids or in the middle or even alternative approaches. But one common question to ask is published peer-reviewed articles showing at least a guess that that approach will work. And those simulations, I should point out, are very good at proving something won't work. They won't prove that it will, but at least if you disprove that it won't work, that's progress. So that's fission.
Great.
I'm sorry, that's fusion. And then on the fission side, what you really want to look for, and this was, mostly true pre-current administration, you wanted to look for a fast path through the NRC. So the NRC is the regulatory body, as Nishant mentioned, that controls, who gets to use the uranium or fuel of choice and how it gets built into reactors. That regulatory body is often criticized for being slow. But there are really good things about being slow. We want to make sure that we think very carefully about national security and safety concerns when you're dealing with fission. So I think there are some good reasons for that slowness. But typically what you want to look for on the fission side is, first of all, why is this a new reactor scheme that should be built? Or why is it an approach to fission that should be built? So one criticism that folks in Europe typically look to the US with is, in Europe in the 70s they never stopped building nuclear. In the US we stopped building fission for the past 50 years. In Europe they kept building it. For example, France has one standardized reactor style that supplies a majority of the electrons on the grid. And in the US, we have almost the exact opposite. We have a small minority of our, or a minority of our electrons are from fission, and it's supplied by a large variety of reactors, which means it's very hard to build cheaply and standardize and get any economy of scale because we have a whole bunch of crazy reactor designs. And so one typical question on the fission side is, hey, why is this new reactor style something that really should be built? And why shouldn't we just standardize on, a Westinghouse AP1000 and build lots of those as cheaply as we can.
That's great. We will definitely dig into a bunch of the regulatory stuff in later in the conversation, but let's make this tangible, right? I'd love for you to talk about 1 to 2 investments that you've made that you're excited about, 1 to 2 that you passed on, and kind of why you passed on them. You don't need to name companies if you don't want to, but you can explain them. And 1 to 2 you wish you invested in that you did not.
Yeah. Let's see. So I will talk about the happy path first, which is the companies that I invested in. Let's see. So a couple I'm excited about. One is on the fusion side, it's actually not a primary fusion scheme. It's a picks and shovels company. So for fusion, one theme is there are these very large, capital intensive efforts that are really trying to kind of brute force their way through this giant bit of science to make fusion happen. And that is absolutely wonderful and should be the case. There is also a theme here where because this industry is going to be big, you don't necessarily need to invest in the fusion primes. You can invest in all of the enabling technologies that those companies as well as others will use. So there are a couple companies that are building fuel for fusion and fission. And for fusion, that means not just the deuterium or tritium itself, but also things like lithium-6, which is something you put in a little blanket around the fusion reaction so that when the neutrons hit it, basically it breeds tritium. So I'm an investor in a company called Hexium that does fuel for fusion. This is really important because there are many hard problems to solve on the way to a fusion reactor. You need to figure out first wall materials and build things that are really tough so when all those neutrons hit them, they don't melt. You need to build fuel so that you can actually fuel your reactors, but you also need stuff like fancy lasers, you need big capacitors, you need solid state switches, you need magnets, so you need all of these things. Yes, Charlie is the best. Thank you, Megan. You need all of these things to make a reactor work on the fusion side. And so the pitch for a picks and shovels company is, hey, let me factor out all of the some small part of the effort you're going to have to spend so you can spend it on the primary fusion characterization, and we'll solve this tiny problem for you. And so the trick there is, can you get to a market that is big enough if fusion happens to take a long time, and are you at the right spot in the timing risk to make that investment actually worthwhile? So that's one on the fusion side. And then on the fission side, one theme that I mentioned earlier, I think there's a couple interesting themes in fission. One is just the project development of the fission reactors themselves. We just, in the US, need to get better at building a bunch of stuff really quickly. And we can also get better at uprating the reactors we have. So the fastest path to electrons on the grid is probably taking all the reactors that have already been built and just making them work more efficiently. So there is a company there that I didn't get a chance to invest in that I think is and there's a number of others that are building on that project development thesis, which is, hey, we're just going to get really good at either improving the energy production of the reactors we already have or building new ones. I think that's a great theme. A second theme where I have made an investment is the so-called sort of shipbuilding manufacturing thesis, which is sort of common to a number of companies on the SMR side, but also to companies that are taking old boring technology and making them more manufacturable. So there's one company here called Deep Vision, in which I'm an investor, which is digging deep holes in the ground, filling them with water, and sticking fuel rods down them to run pressurized water reactors, which are very old 70s technology. The insight here is we can use the water pressure from the deep hole as the containment. And so the actual bit of the reactor that you have to build and manufacture is really small. It's basically a cylinder the size of a refrigerator, skinnier than a refrigerator that you stick down a hole you dig in the ground. So that theme of, hey, how do we rethink the technology that's going into these reactors to make them have a minimal amount of concrete and steel is another way to make the energy that comes out very cheap. So
That's great.
Examples.
And examples of companies that you passed on and why you passed on them?
Oh, I think there were a bunch that were late stage enough where I realized I couldn't really help them very much, because part of the problem of an angel is like, well, why should you give your money to this one company? And yes, there's an answer there, which is, hey, we're going to make a bunch of money on this deal. But then there's another answer, which is, how can I really help this company in a meaningful way? And I passed on um, a couple of the SMR companies when they were very early stage, just because I figured I don't really know anything about building a reactor. That's the help they need, and so why can I help them? Financially, I should have invested in them, but didn't.
Right. All right. By the way, just a reminder to folks, throw your questions in the chat and we'll kind of keep asking them as we see them. And we'll, of course, have time at the end for Q&A as well. Underappreciated founder superpowers in the space, especially for those who aren't from legacy nuclear, or even folks that are in legacy nuclear. Kind of, what are you looking for in founders? What are you looking for in the team, etc.?
Let's see. So on the Fusion side, I think it is very hard to be a non-technical founder in Fusion. I think you need deep physics expertise to be a CEO. And so I think that's one thing I'm looking for. You also need a very long time commitment. So you need to really want to run a company for a long time in this space. On the fission side, I think it's a little bit different. You need to be really good at building stuff. So I think half the battle is, can you raise a whole bunch of capital, and can you deploy that capital in an efficient engineering operation? I think that's probably the most important skill there.
Makes sense. And what about the rest of the team?
Yeah, I mean, I think on the Fusion side, you also need to raise a bunch of capital, because all these companies are going to need a couple $100 million to get to a reactor. And then on the fission side, I think you need a bunch of regulatory experience, because navigating the NRC takes a long time, even in the current administration, even if you're fast tracking a bunch of SMR companies.
Yep, makes sense. Biggest red flags you see in pitch decks in either Fusion or Fission?
For Fusion, I think the lack of peer-reviewed science in a company is a red flag. I think there is a lot of science to do. If that science isn't part of the typical research community, it's going to be a lot harder. That's a red flag. On the fission side, I think it's not understanding the regulatory timelines involved and not planning to build a company for 5 years plus between pre-application and approval.
That's a good time frame for folks to have in mind. And it's not standard at all in outside of the nuclear industry. Thanks for that. And I'm trying to get your sense on how you differentiate between hype versus reality in these cases, right? So what do you think is a reasonable set of claims that companies go after in fission versus fusion for, let's say, fission and fusion for, let's say, the next kind of 2 to 4 year time frame, versus what are claims where you see them, you're like, something's not right here?
Yeah. So I think in fusion, anytime you're getting to actual ion heating or fusion product within 2 to 5 years, it's something that's worth digging into, because typically you're talking about going from something experimental to production where you need to make a multiple orders of magnitude jump in your fusion product, and those things take real engineering effort. So it's just hard and it takes time. So anytime there's a too short of a time frame on the science side for fusion, and then mirroring that on the fission side, anytime you're actually getting regulatory approval in a short period of time, suspicious, because these things are slow.
Got it. Makes sense. Let's throw a quick poll up there related to kind of this concept. Fusion by 2035. What is you guys' bet? Will it power the grid? Will it demo net energy production, but will not be commercial? or straight up no shot. 2040 is at best. We'll give it about 15 seconds for folks to answer. And once you're done, we will close the poll and see what folks think. And I would love to compare that with Mike's answer. Everyone chose the safe in-between route. Mike, what's your take?
Well, so that first question, there will be electrons that flow to the grid by 2035, I think. Primarily, that's going to be CFS's spark. Now, I think those electrons will not be cheap. So I think the trick with fusion is 20 years ago, when fusion was, of course, 20 years away, the progress with solar and batteries was much farther up the learning curve. And so now you have very cheap renewable sources that, even firmed, are probably cheaper than the first fusion electrons are going to be. And so the real question is not when, but the real question is when is it going to be cheaper? And I think what's very likely here in the space is that maybe one magnetic confinement company like Commonwealth, maybe one inertial confinement company like Excimer is actually going to contribute electrons to the grid that are net positive. But those electrons are going to be more expensive than fossil and renewables. The real question is, when are we actually going to get a fusion reactor at scale that is cheap? And I think then you're talking more like 2040s. So I think it's going to be demonstrated with a Q greater than 1, which means producing more energy than it consumes, but it's going to be expensive. It's going to be first of a kind expensive.
That's great.
So this is why it's important to get all sorts of off-takers like Google who are willing to buy your expensive electrons.
Let's shift to the current environment for a moment. So AI data centers, it's kind of been touted as a new rationale for firm and hence nuclear power, which is firm. How much has that changed the investability of this space from your perspective?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, I think yes, there will be huge load growth, a couple percent of overall electricity generation that's going to flow to data centers. But I think it's important to remember that that's only a couple percent. The US load for heating and cooling, namely air conditioning, is larger than the demand for data centers. So I think it's not just data centers. However, I think the urgency that these hyperscalers are building out means that there are hungry customers that sort of rapaciously want to buy generation behind the meter. And so for many of those, the fastest path is probably not going to be fusion or fission. The exception there is uprating or restarting existing plants. So this is what you saw with 3 Mile Island and Microsoft. But I think that's more the exception. So I think you will get some amount of demand from the existing nuclear fleet on the fission side. But I think the sad reality is the vast majority of that short term now is going to be met by natural gas turbines, maybe with a little bit met by solar and storage. So it's kind of a depressing answer.
Yep, we're living through that. Similar other current environment thing, the Trump administration's push on deregulation, fast tracking. Look, there's a lot of combination of flip-flopping, hot air, etc. over here. But how are you more bullish because of it? Are you more cautious on execution risk because of the deregulation? Kind of what's your take on this whole situation?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it makes me think that a lot of these trends were actually happening pre-Trump. So the Advance Act passed during the Biden administration and directed the NRC to deregulate. Obviously, that momentum is increasing. I think on the flip side for fission, you've got Iran now, and there's more worries over proliferation. And so I think that's a bit of a headwind for some of these companies, particularly on the fuel side. But I think there are one silver lining to the giant mess that we're currently in is slightly faster regulatory path for building out fission. So I think that's good.
Yep. For angel and early stage investors in the room, how should they think about future funding sources or handoff points to growth and strategic investors when they're evaluating an investment, right? So what should they be looking for? Who should be on their Rolodex for them to consult with as they're looking to make these early stage investments, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I think for both fusion and fission, you have your set of early and mid and late stage investors that have made a bunch of bets in the space, that have interest in making more. And I think what you want to find is actually a founder that is aware of that fundraising ecosystem and can raise a bunch of capital. Because I think both these companies are not CapEx light. And the bet you really have to make is that the team you're backing can raise a whole bunch of money downstream. And this isn't always the case, and some of these skills can be learned. But I think it is important to back founders that have the ability to go the distance on the fundraising side.
Got it. And do you recommend that as investors, you build your own network of folks in the later stage of this continuum because it helps in your process?
I think so. I mean, what I did is actually email, basically cold email or get introductions from friends to a bunch of other investors and say, hey, I'm looking to do a bunch of angel investments in this space. You've made a bunch of them. Can you talk to me about it? And then you find the subset of people that really want to geek out on both fusion and fission, and there's lots of those. So I think like anything else, if you're really excited about it, you can find the people that want to geek out with you.
Got it. Makes sense. Second poll for the folks left in the room. This one about fission. So the poll question is, what fission tech do you expect to actually hit the market first? For the folks that are not super into the space, there might be a bunch of new stuff here, but different types of fission tech: sodium fast reactor, high temp gas, molten salt, microfast. Curious to hear if folks have responses, and would love to get Mike's take on it. Okay. Pretty split responses. Mike, what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, I think I will actually answer E, which is more licensed AP1000s getting built. So the pre-approved reactor designs that are boring, and there is a whole fleet of project development companies that are trying to just build the boring stuff, which does not have fancy fuel or fancy scale economics, but they make a bunch of energy in very relatively boring ways. I think of this list, and I think you can actually you can kind of cheat and look at the NRC approvals. So I think TerraPower, Oklo, Allo, Radiant, all of those are in flight and will be building reactors in the next couple of years, which is great.
Awesome. The theme I'm taking away on fission is figure out how we can build the stuff we've already built a lot faster. That's a good thing to keep in mind.
And another thing you can do is look for all of those companies. You can look and see when they started the NRC approval process, and they're now sort of coming out the other end. So you can feel reasonably confident that because the science risk there is low, it's really the regulatory risk. As soon as they pop out the other end of the NRC approval, they can get some reactors built.
Got it. That's great. All right, looking forward. So what part of the stack are you most excited about today? And what's the weird bet you hope someone builds next?
My weird bet is, in general, so I'm excited about the stuff outside of the nuclear wall. So we use all sorts of tricky ways to boil water, and this is true with nuclear power as well. I'm excited about the things that don't involve Rankine cycle heat. So ways of taking, kinetic or heat energy from a nuclear reaction and directly generating electricity from it. So This is things like thermophotovoltaics, thermionics, thermoelectrics, other ways of directly generating, typically with solid state, electricity from those reactors. And the reason that's nice is because in theory, without moving parts, you can have a smaller balance of plant, you can spend less money on it, it can last for a longer time, and the electrons that come out the other end are cheaper. So I'm interested in that area.
That's great. Should we get into a quick lightning round?
Let's do it.
Okay. Regulator you'd most want to sit down to drinks with, the NRC. Well, the DOE. DOE is not a regulator, but kind of let's broadly call it government body. NRC, DOE, Trump, somebody else.
I think probably NRC. Probably not.
And what would you pepper them with?
How are they thinking about all of the advanced reactor regulatory burdens, and how do you sort of balance the good with the bad? There's this big push to go fast, but how do they keep everybody safe? I mean, yes, in tech, we want everything to happen fast, but like I said earlier, those regulations happen for a reason, and they're good reasons.
That's great. I'm going to flip this question from what we had discussed earlier. If you had $10 million to put on one thing inside the reactor core, not outside, because you already answered the outside question. If you had $10 million to put on one thing inside the reactor core, what would you put it in?
Ways of making non-fissile fuels actually happen with fission. So weird thorium, things like that.
Great. Biggest risk, tech not working, public backlash, policy whiplash, something else.
I think it's building slowly and having more Vogels in the future.
All right. Sweet. I'm out of my questions, guys. We still have some time. Do we have audience questions? Just come off of mute. Enter the conversation. I'm sure you have burning questions on your side.
I have a question. Yeah, so I guess it's similar to the fusion question or like poll that we had, like for small modular reactors, like there's literally one that's been approved for like construction and the entire like G7. When do you expect there to be like scale and like multiple small modular reactors, like I guess to start construction, but also like generating electrons for the grid?
I think it's going to take 10 years because a lot of these reactors, they have much lower fuel burnup. So it's not just that they're cheap to build, the CapEx is lower, but the OpEx, if you will, is higher because they're not as efficient as the big AP1000s that have economies of scale. And so I think it is a hard engineering effort to cheaply produce the fuel and burn the fuel more efficiently in SMRs. And so even if they look cheap, it's going to take a while before the electrons coming out the other end are actually, below 100 megawatts. $100 per megawatt, sorry.
Great. Agneta had a question. I don't know if everyone saw this. She had a question for me. Can I speak about the investments I have done in this area? I have not done any investments in this area myself, in fact, because I just didn't have enough familiarity with the space. So this conversation has been as eye-opening to me as it has been to most of the other folks on this call. But Mike, maybe you can speak to a couple more. Oh yeah, Climate Capital. Mike is the brain trust over there because, as I had mentioned, Mike is kind of our go-to person when it comes to all of nuclear investments in Climate Capital. So Mike, would be great if you can speak to 2 or 3 of the recent investments that Climate Capital has done on in the nuclear
See if
side.
I can actually put a link in the chat for that.
I was thinking, for example, HIPhases technologies.
I'm sorry, what was that, Agneta?
HIPhases fusion. HIPhases. Climate Capital has invested in HIPhases.
I'm sorry, I'm just not sure that the word you said.
Okay, I will type it out in the.
Yeah, if you
That's
put it
the
in the
one I
chat.
know about. Hold on. I have to make sure I get the spelling right. 1 second. Oh, I guess you don't know, so it doesn't matter.
Mike, you throwing a few on the chat right now?
I'm trying to pull it up from the website here. So I think Climate Capital is in a number of fusion companies. I think, was that the question? Or fission?
Yeah, you talked
Fission or fusion?
to some of those that Climate Capital has invested in. I only know HipFaces. I don't know others.
So I think Climate Capital is in Avalanche, which is a fusion company, as well as Marathon Fusion, I believe General Fusion, which is relatively late stage. I think Renaissance Fusion. Let me see if I can find a better list. But I think all of those are Climate Capital microfund investments.
Okay.
Jerry's starting to drop links over there.
Oh, great. Thank you, Terry.
While that's happening, oh, Kerry has a question. Do you anticipate that fusion companies will face public pushback in fusion with fission?
Maybe. That's interesting. I think the other question about fusion that we sort of skirted over is, I think a risk there isn't really public pushback, but I think there is some regulatory risk. So for example, tritium is deuterium, tritium are the two fuels for fusion. Tritium is a NNSA controlled substance, and so there will be regulatory overhead around tritium from fusion companies. And so I think the risk there is actually there is still some baby regulatory risk, even though it's not used for weapons. In the same way, it is still there is still some regulatory risk with fusion. So I think that's actually the risk there, I believe.
I have a question to throw out. We've talked quite a bit about the scene in the US. As you mentioned, internationally, fission has, or especially in Europe, and I've heard about South Korea as well, fission's just been part of reality for a long time. Have you seen a bunch of activity going on in terms of early stage companies coming out of, say, France, South Korea, kind of countries where it's just normal reality?
So I think, yes, I'm not as plugged in those spaces. There are startups. Honestly, most of them are in the US just because the reactors over there, they're already being built out. Like it's less of a need to invent better reactors and more just a scale question for the designs they already have in play. So I think most of the new reactor designs that I've seen are sort of US, a little bit UK, and a couple in Europe, but I think the majority are here.
Got it.
Hey, Mike.
Any other? Yeah, go ahead.
Quick one. This is Rahul here. I invested via Climate Capital in Renaissance a few years ago. I have not really paid attention. So any comments there? I saw they raised the official Series A last winter.
Yeah, I have actually not, I actually don't know details about how the company is doing. I did see their Series A last year, but I don't know the details.
Got it.
I think they're doing a smart thing, which is I believe they're one of the vendors that's trying to sell HTS magnets to fund their way to eventual fusion, which is sort of a common trick in the space where it's going to take a while to get to actual fusion energy. So you sell the picks and shovels to the other fusion companies along the way, which is smart.
Great. Any other questions from folks? Nope. All right. Well, you all know where to find us. You have my email address. Mike, I'm sure your email address is up on beep.vc. Would love if you all check it out. thank you again, folks, for joining. Just a couple of quick more plugs. Climate Angels starting on July 10. The Climate Capital Network Fund is open for Q3. And outside of that, yeah, no more questions, just links. And Mike just threw his email address out on the chat. So appreciate you guys taking the time to jump into this conversation. And hopefully we will see you again soon.
Awesome. Thanks for your time, everyone.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.